Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be doing my mid-year book freakout tag. Just to quickly summarize my year, if you've been watching my videos, which I haven't been posting that much of this year, but if you've seen them, you've heard this all before, but I just want to put these notes up top because I think it'll probably inform a lot of the answers that I'm going to give today. But basically, my year of reading so far has been a little bit kind of, I want to say suboptimal. I don't feel super bad about it, but it's just definitely one of those years where I know that the second half of the year, I kind of want it to go a little bit differently. A lot of my reading this year has been either nonfiction or romance, which is fine. Like, I'm pretty happy with reading a lot of nonfiction, very happy with reading a lot of romance, happy to learn things, happy to read about people falling in love. That's all really great, whatever. But one of my things that I've been wanting for the year, like from the beginning, is to be reading more non-romance fiction, just because so much of my fiction reading has become dominated by romance. So, that's where I feel a little bit meh about how my reading has gone this year. The other thing is I've had kind of a rough beginning to the year. I had a miscarriage early on in 2022. It was my second one, after one that I'd had last summer. So I just kind of definitely went through a period of not really enjoying reading at all. But the past few weeks, I've been pretty excited. I had a pretty good set of books that I checked out from the library, and I've made slow but steady progress on those books. So I have read a little bit more fiction, definitely read more nonfiction, because I checked out some books about reality TV, and what are you gonna do if you're like me and you feel compelled to read anything that is written about reality TV? But overall, yeah, I am feeling optimistic about the second half of my year in terms of what I've got lined up. But a lot of the answers that I'm going to be giving today are going to be really centered around nonfiction and romance. So let's just get into it. So the first question is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And for this, I think I might have to go with one of the first books that I read this year, and that is On Immunity by Oila Biss. And I read this for Nonfiction Book Club that I do with Nicole over at Sweeney Says. We're on a bit of a pause right now, but we'll probably be picking back up in the next month or so. So this book is a book that I've wanted to read for a while, but kind of put off reading because I was sort of jealous of its existence. On Immunity is sort of this cultural examination of vaccination and also the anti-vax movement. And so it's really interested in combining the science of vaccines with a lot of the cultural perceptions around vaccinations and just our understanding of immunity in general and how that shapes the choices that we make for ourselves. And in particular with this book, Biss is also very interested in how this shapes her choices as a mother and as someone who is thinking about, I have to make these decisions for my kid about vaccinations, and a lot of the anti-vax rhetoric is really grounded in the choices that people are having to make as parents, sometimes with incomplete information. And so I think it's a very good critical but also empathetic analysis of what shapes both people's drive to pursue vaccination, but also people's skepticism around vaccination. The reason why I was jealous about this book before I read it is that my understanding of it is that it is this really interesting combination of cultural and scientific sort of analysis, which is so very much up my alley, and especially as someone who loves the immune system, grew up kind of obsessed with vaccines because my dad was working on vaccines when I was a kid. So I don't know, there's a lot of things about this book where I was like, oh God, that sounds like a book I wish I could have written. I think once I actually sat down to read it for a Nonfiction Book Club, it also became apparent that this is not a book I could have written because it is so rooted in a lot of her own personal experiences as a mother and with pregnancy. And so the very specific, scary experiences that she's had in that regard, and also kind of subsequent to that, that have shaped her vision of not just vaccinations, but also of the conversations around vaccinations. And I just really appreciated this book overall. It's a book that's not necessarily about declaring specific answers, but just as sort of a meditation on the many anxieties around disease and also motherhood. So this has so far been one of my favorite books that I've read this year, and I'm sure I'm going to read a lot of other really great books this year, but I think this will be one of the standouts by the time the year is over. Second question is, what is the best sequel you've read this year? For sure, for this one, I have to say The Long Game by Rachel Reed. This is the latest in her Game Changer series about gay hockey players. I talked about this in a video recently, but this is technically the fifth or sixth book in the series, but it's really a sequel to the second book of the series. It's a follow-up to this couple, Shane and Ilya, who we first meet in Heated Rivalry, the second book, which is a book that the first time I read it didn't quite land with me, but then I just kind of decided on a whim to reread it. And as that happens for plenty of romance novels, the second time I read it, suddenly I was like, I get it. I get why people love this book. And Heated Rivalry is this like really interesting book that takes place over many, many years and ends in this sort of question mark place. Like it's definitely the Shane and Ilya are committed together, but they're still like having to hide their relationship. And so the long game really picks up on that and kind of examines where they go from there. And it is a big book. It is definitely long, I think, by at least the standards of this series, but it is so worth it. I think Reed clearly had a blast writing a lot of the scenes in it. There's definitely some choices that were made in it as far as where the conflicts go in the book that I don't necessarily love. I think the couple conflicts, like the conflicts that Shane and Ilya have, are really, really interesting. And actually, I was watching an Instagram live that Reed did where she's talking about how one of the kind of aspects of Shane's character that she was like kind of going through or kind of portraying in this book is a lot of his selfishness, which definitely sounds harsh, but the way that I think she meant it and the way that I understood it in the book was something that I really related to. Like Shane is selfish in a way that I understand as a person who is selfish in relationships in this particular way. And I really, really liked the way that that worked in the context of this book, about the way that it shapes his relationship with his career as this professional hockey player who's like one of the best, and then also how it shapes his relationship with Ilya as they're doing this weird secret long distance relationship thing that not many people are really going to understand once it's revealed. So some of the external conflict stuff didn't necessarily love, but the internal conflicts and the portrayal of the characters and how they continue to grow and how they continue to make you love them over the course of this book. I loved it so much. I was so worried that the sequel was not going to be able to do everything that it needed to do, especially because I had been waiting for it for a long time, but it was so good. I loved it. Question number 3, what is a new release you haven't read yet but want to? This is definitely Virology by Joseph Osmundson, and I received an ARC of this book from W.W. Norton, and I requested it because as soon as I heard about it, I was like, yes, I want to read this book. This is a collection of essays about viruses. Osmundson is a microbiologist. From what I understand, it's very much in that vein of like combining science and culture and examining them both in the same thing. So that is so very much up my alley, and I have been wanting to read it and will read it. Like I'm definitely going to read it. I think it's sort of like On Immunity, where the thing that holds me back is the fact that because I haven't read it yet, all it is this abstract concept of a book that I wish I had written, even though once I actually start reading it, I know it's going to be very specifically probably a book I couldn't have written. Question number 4, what is your most anticipated release for the rest of the year? There's a lot of books. I feel like there's a lot of romances I'm really excited for. The one that I can like think of that's coming up soon is Charlie Adhara's new series. And I talked about her series, Big Bad Wolf series, I think. I don't know. It's a werewolf romance series, and I am usually not a werewolf romance person, but like that series was so good. I loved it so much. And so she has this new series coming out, and the next book, or the first book in that series called Pack of Lies, is coming out in August, and it's a continuation of that previous series, but I think we're now focused on a new central couple. The previous series was focused on these two particular characters, and we watch them grow and fall in love and everything over the course of 5 books, which I'm realizing is now kind of my jam. Like I think I am starting to get very, very biased towards romance series where you get to follow a couple over multiple books, even if it means that the first book isn't like a full happily ever after. I'm cool with that. I love getting to see people change over an extended period of time rather just in one particular book. So I'm excited for that, for a new series, and to get invested in werewolves all over again, even though I am not usually a werewolf person. So yeah, I'm excited for that. Question number 5, what is your biggest disappointment? The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Even though I knew going into it that the risk of me not liking it was high, I did want to like it. I did really, really want to like it because it has so many things to it that like I want to see, right? Like it's about science. It's about people in academia falling in love. Like, I support that. Like, I mean, I support academics falling in love. Whatever. I like want to see more romance novels set in the science world, but it just didn't work for me. And I talked for a very long time about why in a previous video, and I'll link to that down below, because like if I start now, it's just gonna keep going. Like, I feel like in my head, like I made that video and I am still to this day having moments of being like, just to no one in particular, just being like, and another thing, right? Because there are still so many things that I just found very frustrating about that book. I think the central thing I'll say is that I think the reason why the book really failed for me, beyond my like very stupid kind of gripes around how it like portrays academia in a way that like doesn't make sense to me. I think the real issue for the book, and I think the reason why those things end up bothering me so much more, is because the rest of the book, like in particular the characters, I think are so weakly conceived in that book. And because there wasn't so much else for me to grab onto, like I think if the characters had felt really fully thought out to me and felt like, I don't know, like if they had felt like real people rather than plot devices. And I'm saying that even about the central characters. Like, I don't think your central character should feel like plot contrivances. But so I think like if it had felt like that part had been better fleshed out, I think the other stuff wouldn't have bothered me as much, because I would have been so invested in what was going on centrally with these characters. But I did not find Olive to be a particularly compelling character, did not find Adam to be a very compelling character. And I think a lot of that, it's not just that they were frustrating as like people. I think it's because the writing of them was actually really inconsistent, and so much of the book was written with like particular like elements just sort of thrown together, that by the time it tried to actually delve into the characters, for me, there just wasn't really much to grab onto. And so the overall book just felt really flat, and I just didn't care. And I'm leaving it there because if I keep talking, we're just gonna keep going on this particular subject, and I have already talked enough about the love hypothesis. So the next question is biggest surprise. And for this, I've got two books, one nonfiction and one romance. The nonfiction is The Doctor's Blackwell by Janice P. Nomura. I read this for the first round of the BookTube prize, and the book is about the Doctor's Blackwell, so Elizabeth Blackwell, who is known as the first female MD in the United States. And then it's also focused on her sister, Emily Blackwell, who also went on to become a doctor. And I think the reason why I went into this book with kind of, I wouldn't say low expectations, but definitely very managed expectations, is because for me, this just feels of a piece with like books I read as a kid that are about like women in STEM, that are just like, here is first woman whatever in the thing. Actually, like, I did read a book as a kid that was about Elizabeth Blackwell. So like when I say that it feels like it's one of those books, it's because I'm thinking about a specific book that I read as a kid about Elizabeth Blackwell. I don't know if that book was good or bad, right? It was like, I read that a long time ago, but in my head, they were sort of part of this kind of building of books that are just, I don't know, their goal is just to be like women raw. Like, I don't want to say like full girl boss, because I don't think that's like what they're really doing, but like, I don't know. It's just, as far as things that I'm looking for now, like when it comes to biographies of female scientists, I mean, this BookTube prize round also had the biography of Jennifer Doudna, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But like this book, at least, like I went in with my expectations managed, because basically for kind of the same reason of just like, I don't know, I want something that is going to be engaging with their subjects a little bit critically. And sometimes with biographies you get that, and sometimes you don't. With this, I think people's like ideas of how much it's engaging with its subjects critically will vary. I thought it was really interesting. I thought that the way that in particular the book was like pretty like upfront about Elizabeth Blackwell's internalized misogyny was fascinating. There were so many points in the book where I was like, I think like this excerpt from her journal, or this thing that she said to someone, is like something that I have read some woman write on Reddit before. And it was just kind of fascinating to see the several centuries old version of that from a woman who like ostensibly I admire for achieving what she achieved at the time that she achieved it. It's not necessarily the best biography or anything that I've read, but it was a lot more interesting than I initially gave it credit for. I will say that I listened to the audiobook of it first before I actually started reading it in print. And I think this is one of the rare times where I don't really think that the audiobook is necessarily worth checking out. I just found that, like, for some reason there were jokes in the book that, like, maybe were just dry in a particular way that the narrator couldn't particularly get across, or at least I read them as dry humor in a way that didn't come across in the audiobook. So I preferred this much more in print than I did in audiobook. But yeah, I just ended up enjoying this a lot more than I expected to. I also wish that it had gone a little bit more into Emily Blackwell's life. It is heavily focused on Elizabeth Blackwell, and I'm assuming that's partly just because of what's available, and also the fact that Elizabeth Blackwell is super well known. But it just meant that even though it was technically about both sisters, I felt like it was very heavily biased towards being about Elizabeth Blackwell, and there was kind of this like glaring void of information about the other Dr. Blackwell. The other book that surprised me was Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. Also talked about this recently in that same video where I talked about the love hypothesis and also the long game. There's a lot of romance going on in that video. So Delilah Green Doesn't Care. The reason why I went into it with kind of my lower expectations there is just because a lot of the hyped contemporary romances that are out now, and I guess in the past few years, are just not necessarily romances that I click with. I don't know. A lot of them are just like not necessarily my jam. And I think it's just like there's where the audience is right now and there's where I'm at, and sometimes it overlaps and sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of times with those hyped romances, they just don't like click as strongly for me as I think they do for a lot of other people. I think Emily Henry is sort of an example of that. Like, I think her books are good. I don't get as excited for her books though, as I do for like other romances. I don't know that Delilah Green was like hyped on the level that like Emily Henry's books are, but it's just part of why, I don't know, I had that sort of initial hesitation. But I just love this book so much. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it has such a strong sense of like who these characters are and for why the conflicts exist, and also what it takes for them to get past it. And it just ended up being a lot more emotional and about a lot more like family dynamics than I necessarily expected going in. And I felt like it really went all in and committed to the fact that the characters that we're rooting for are also characters who are often getting it wrong. And I just really enjoyed the way that that Blake worked with that she really like embraced that and also left the book in a place where at least for me, I'm really excited to see what this means for some of the other characters in the orbit of the series. Like I said earlier that I like am loving romance series where you follow like the same couple over multiple books. This is like one of the rare series where I'm like actually very excited mostly about the fact that we're now expanding into other couples, because I also trust that even though we're going to be visiting other couples in the series, I don't know why I say visiting, but anyways, you know what I mean. Even though we're going to be like focusing on other couples, I feel like what this book makes me feel really confident in is Blake's ability to like build out all of the characters at once. It was such a good emotional gut punch of a book, and I really would recommend it for anyone who's looking for a romance, especially a sapphic romance where the characters are, I don't know, just very well thought out. Question number 7, who is your favorite new author? For this, I'm probably gonna have to say Daniel J. Lindemann, the author of True Story, What Reality TV Says About This. I judge people so much based on how they analyze and talk about reality TV. It's not like a moral judgment, mostly. I know based on how you talk about reality TV, whether or not we are meant to talk about reality TV together. And the feeling that I got out of this book is that Lindemann is someone that I would want to talk to about reality TV with. I think she did a great job in this book of engaging with reality TV on the terms that I think are most interesting, which are less about, is this real, is this not real, and more about like, what does the fact of its existence say, real or not real? And like, what does the qualities around reality TV say about what we're looking at and what we value and everything? So I think if you're looking for a good reality TV book, this is a pretty recent release, and I would recommend checking it out because I think it is well done. Yeah, I learned a lot from it in a way that, you know, as someone who spends too much time thinking about reality TV, I wasn't necessarily expecting, because I've just gotten used to the idea that I have like exhausted all reality TV conversations. And this book was such a great reminder that actually, no, you have not. Reality TV conversations are endless, and there's always more to learn. Question number 8 and 9 are like the favorite character and like fictional crush characters questions, and I never really have strong feelings about these questions. And I think especially this year, because most of my fiction reading is romance, and I don't know, I feel like it's always a little bit of a cop-out to like describe any like romance characters like a fictional crush, because they're like all written to be somebody's crush. But I don't know. I guess I am reading Sense and Sensibility. And so like maybe like by the end of it, I'll be like, these are my favorite characters. But for now, I don't know. They're all fine characters. They're all good. Question number 10, what is a book that made you cry? For this, I would definitely have to say What God Is Honored Here, Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss by and for Native women and women of color. I read this after having my second miscarriage. I checked it out from the library, so I don't have it still, and I haven't read all of the pieces that are in this collection. But basically there was like one night where I just like had, you know, the combination of the hormones and everything else kind of like hit me all at once. And it was one of those nights where I was just like, I need to cry. And so I picked this book up and went through various pieces in it, just kind of like randomly skipping around the book. And yeah, it made me cry. I mean, I think you can probably understand from the title why it is like definitely inherently very emotional. And then I was just like in a place where I was very emotional, and it was exactly the book that I needed at that time. It was like a one-person group therapy session, and I am very grateful to all of the writers in it who contributed. I did talk about this in my video about books I read after my miscarriage, and I'll link to that down below if you're looking for other books about miscarriage that might be helpful to you. I talk about 3 books, and they kind of like each, I don't know, talk about, I guess, or address a different aspect of the miscarriage experience. And for me in particular, this was like the catharsis aspect. This was the, I just need to sit around with other people who have been through this kind of aspect. And yeah, so it definitely made me cry, and I'm very thankful that it did. Question number 11, books that made you happy. And for this, like basically these are the books that I read after kind of working through a lot of those feelings. And these are books that I talked about earlier in this video. And those are The Long Game and Delilah Green Doesn't Care. They came to me at a time when I had been going through a lot, and they were what I needed. They were the exact kind of emotional escape that I needed. And I really, yeah, they made me happy. Question number 12, what was your favorite book to film adaptation you saw this year? I don't know if The Batman counts. It probably doesn't. I mean, it's gotta have been an adaptation of some Batman comic, but I just watched it on an airplane and I was surprised by how much I loved it. But I don't know if that counts. I guess I watched Bridgerton season 2 and I enjoyed that. I get why people enjoyed it more than the first season. I think I did too. I'm always gonna root for the brown girls to do well, to get there, to get some action in inappropriate places. I didn't super love parts of it though. Like I feel like the portrayal of the younger sister in particular was like a little bit weak, and just when things start to shift in the story, it shifted so abruptly in a way that I didn't like super love. The actress was amazing. Like she was super sweet and charismatic, but I just overall I was a little frustrated with that. But yeah, I guess I would have to say Bridgerton season 2. Just by default. Question number 13, what's your favorite video you've done this year? I have not made a lot of videos this year, and some of the ones that I've made have been downers, so I guess I think I'm gonna have to go with one of our nonfiction book clubs. So it's not on my channel. This is actually one of our most recent discussions, and this was The Girl in the Show. So this is on Nicole's channel, and I'll link to it down below. This was a book we did not enjoy. And we don't often read books that are like so unequivocally books that we didn't like. And so this ended up being super fun because I don't know if it's fun to anyone else, but it was definitely very fun for us, just because it was very frustrating as a book, very frustrating. And I guess, okay, on a less jokey note, what I will say is that one of the great things about Nonfiction Book Club and also doing the BookTube Prize is that both of those have really helped me think more critically about what it is I want out of nonfiction and how I want my nonfiction to be done and what it is that I'm particularly turning to nonfiction for. And a lot of times I have learned that from books that are really, really good and do things in a way that I'm like, that's aspirational. Like if I could ever write like that, that would be incredible, right? And sometimes you learn that from books that you really don't like. And this was one of those experiences. And I'm just glad I had that experience with Nicole, because there's no one I would rather be like questioning our choices with than, with Nicole. Okay, question number 14. What's the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received? I think I'm gonna have to go with The Odyssey. This is the Emily Wilson translation. Just because it has gold foil on it. That's a pretty superficial answer, but I guess this is a very superficial question. I don't know. If you put gold on something, I'll love it. Like that's just, I don't know. That's part of who I am. And the last question number 15. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? I have two for this. One is Crime and Punishment, which I am wanting to read after having read The Sinner and the Saint for the BookTube Prize. The Sinner and the Saint is about Dostoevsky and also a little bit about the actual true crime story that inspired aspects of the character that is central to Crime and Punishment. The Sinner and the Saint was not my favorite book. I think it was okay. I think it overpromised a little on that true crime element, which I kind of assume was done for marketing reasons, just because, it's one thing to be like, hey, I'm writing a book about Dostoevsky. It's another thing to be like, hey, I'm writing a Dostoevsky true crime story, And it also just made for kind of an imbalanced reading experience overall because it is so heavily about Dostoevsky. And then every so often you're randomly hearing about random French murderer guy instead. So, it wasn't my favorite book, but the point is that it got me very interested in Crime and Punishment and wanting to actually read it. I have not read a massive amount of Russian literature, so it's definitely a little bit intimidating, but I have been listening at times to the audiobook, and I think kind of going back between the audiobook and the physical book will hopefully get me to the end of the book by the end of the year. The other book that I really need to read this year is The Barcelona Complex by Simon Cooper. I actually bought this as a gift for my husband because this is a book about soccer. It's a book about Barcelona, FC Barcelona, and about just like what a fucking clusterfuck they are. If you follow soccer, like you were aware of the fact that at the beginning of this past season, Barcelona was in kind of some mess, had some issues going on. And so I always love a good like clusterfuck business story, and combining that with like a soccer story makes me even more curious about the whole thing. So he really enjoyed it, and so he keeps telling me that I need to read it, and I know that he is correct. So I will read it. The question is when. I have no idea. The real problem I'm having is that my husband is a professor and he's going on sabbatical, which is basically professor vacation. It's not like vacation. Technically, like they just like go and do what they want to do. It is like the time where they're not teaching classes. They can do whatever research they want, do fellowships or whatever. So he is planning to do research, and he is going to go to other places so we can like do the research in other places. So those other places include Norway, where we're going to be in the fall, and then probably Texas, where we'll be in the spring, since that's also where some of his family lives. So we're traveling, and so there are these books that I want to read, and I have the physical copies of them, but I don't want to be moving around with them. Like, I don't really feel like it's super smart for me to pack up a lot of books just to bring them to another country and then to another state. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's not clear yet, but I will read them hopefully before the end of the year. So that is my mid-year book freakout tag. I hope your guys' year of reading so far has been good. If you have been happy, let me know, or if there's specific changes that you're looking to make in the second half of your year, like I am, like trying to read more non-romance fiction and really getting more of that, something else that might be new to you or something in there. Let me know down below, and yeah, bye.